Well, hi, welcome back to Sumatra on Bass. This week we had a couple of interesting questions from one of our viewers who bought the Fender Japanese Hybrid 2 Jazz Bass. And the first question was the pole pieces on the Jazz pickup under the E string are kind of lower than the plastic casing, and is that normal? So I checked mine and said, yep, that's what mine looks like too. The pole pieces are staggered in height. So to answer that question, I think the reason they do that, and I've seen that before on some guitars, some Stratocasters where the pole pieces are staggered, it's to even out the balance between the strings. And to explain that, I can refer to a little diagram. So if that's looking from the end of the bass, so the bottom end, that's the pickup, and that green line represents the fretboard, right? And then the red dots are the strings, so the G string, all the way up to the E string there. And what we normally do is to set the G string a little closer to the fretboard, and then as we go across, they get a little bit higher and a little bit higher and a little bit higher. And on my setup, at the last fret, the measurement there is 2/32, and here it's 5/64. So when you think about this, with these pole pieces on this end being much lower than these ones and these ones, if we were setting it up in this fashion and just slightly higher as we get thicker in strings, then the pickup would be a little bit closer here and a little bit further away on that side, because you would tilt it to compensate for the difference in the response, because there's a lot more metal in the E string than there is in the G string. So if it was tilted down on this side, it would even out the response on the E string, but then you find the A string is a little bit lacking. So I think they've done this to compensate for that. So you have more even response from all the strings if the bass is set up properly without actually having to mess around and tilt the pickup. So I hope that helps to sort of answer that question, or why I think that they would do that, because they all appear to be the same. The second question pertains to getting a low action. Now on this particular bass, I was able to get the action where I like it. As I said, if I capo at the first fret, measure between the top of the fret and the bottom of the string at the last fret, 2/32 at the G string, 5/64 at the E, I could get it lower than that and it was still very playable, but because I like that feel, I'm used to that, I set it up to my standard specs. So the second question was, I've set the action low, but I can't set it as low as I would like. I'm getting buzzing at the 12th fret and beyond. And usually the scenario there is, unless you have a high fret somewhere, which is rather unlikely these days, is that there is too much relief in the neck. And how that pans out is, unless you're fairly seasoned at the setup, you end up, I've tried to draw this and it's not a very good drawing, so you'll have to excuse me, but it kind of looks like this. If this is the neck with the frets, and that's the nut up this side and the bridge over here. Okay, I'm trying to hold this straight as I do this backwards. If I have, and this is obviously pronounced bow in the neck, and I'm trying to lower my action simply by adjusting the saddles at the bridge, I end up with the situation where if I'm fretting like here, those frets over there are sort of ramping up closer to the string, you see. So anytime I'm fretting around in this area here, I'm going to get a buzz because these frets are in the way now. That means this is too low. And if you can't get this as low as you would like, there's probably too much bow in the neck. So you need to gently tighten the truss rod and straighten it up and try and get this part right before you start playing with this part, with the bridge, because that will make a big difference. It's, I think, a mistake we all make in the beginning when we're learning. But the gap, so you put a capo on the first fret, hold down with your hand the string at the last fret, so you got a straight edge, and somewhere at the 7th or 8th fret here, the gap should be somewhere between 0.010 to 0.014 max of gap, so that you can effectively get a good setup. So it's something that you need to work to understand what your playing style is like. If you're playing really softly, you can have the neck straighter and the saddles lower. If you're playing quite aggressively or closer to the end of the fingerboard, you will need slightly more relief in the neck, so a bigger distance here, and slightly higher action there, which then will affect your intonation, so you need to adjust that too. And when we're talking about action, it's really, really hard to kind of, it's really hard to get this on camera because it's such a fine adjustment. But I'm going to try and run the camera down the neck, so maybe we can see or get a visual on how this is kind of set up. So let's try and do that. So I don't know how well we're picking this up, but you can see at this end the nut is cut properly. There's a small gap to clear those frets. As we go down the neck, you can see that the neck is sloping ever so slightly downwards, and then somewhere near the 12th fret it kind of starts to flatten out, and it's almost completely flat from there really. The truss rod doesn't affect that area of the neck, it only affects the area up behind there, up to the nut sort of thing, right in the middle. That is 3 30-seconds, that line there is 2 30-seconds, so it's just in the middle. It's split the difference. It's about 5/64 of an inch, and that plays just fine. The neck relief is set to 0.010 inches at the 7th fret, and the bass has no problem at all with playing nicely with that setting. So essentially your action is a balance of those things, and usually if you need a higher action, like higher at the bridge, you'll also need a little bit more relief. It means you're playing harder. If you're playing softer, you can get a straighter neck. You can't really get the neck completely straight. Not many basses will play that way. I do a lot of experimentation, and one of the things that Roger Sadowski recommends is to actually get this first position playing cleanly. So you tighten the truss rod till you start getting buzzes here, and then back it off until they disappear. And that generally gives you between, at the 7th fret, 0.08, 0.010 inches of relief, and that'll give, depending on obviously how hard you play, if you're really digging in, it might give you 0.014 inches, and your saddles here will have to be set a little higher. But for me, I'm not a hard player. It's generally 0.010, 0.008 inches at the 7th or 8th fret is sufficient. As I said before, if I capo the 1st fret to take the nut out of the equation, I'm going from the G string at 2/32, slightly higher for the D and A strings, and 5/64 at the E string. And if it's a 5 string, the B string is like a hair under 3/32 because it's a bigger string, it has bigger vibration. And getting back to the pickup thing, besides that, the E string is kind of following the curve but still sitting a little bit higher. There's a lot more metal in the string, in the E string, than there is, say, on the G string. So there's more effect on the magnetic field of the pickups. And also, there is more motion on the E string. It moves a lot more. The G string kind of does this, the E string kind of does that, and the B string kind of has more. So there's more disturbance of the magnetic field. So that would be, if all other things are equal, they would be louder, simply because they have more metal and they move a lot more in the magnetic field. So I hope that helps to answer some of those questions. I try as much as possible to share things that I've learnt, that I've sort of asked a lot of questions of a lot of people that do this, and it's helped a lot, because when you, especially when you're touring and traveling, you don't have the time, or sometimes you just can't find somebody that can do these things quickly as you would like. So you're forced to kind of learn to tweak the neck on the bass, set the action, do all these little maintenance things to keep everything going. So it's a good skill, and there's nothing to be afraid of. You can always take, say, on a stock bass, the measurements, the height of the strings at the last fret, the relief, and you just use a set of feel gauges to find the one that fits without deflecting the string and not having a gap, and then write those down. And then whatever adjustments you make from there, if you don't like them, you can always revert back to the original settings. So I've just worked out over the years that they're my preferred setup settings, and all my basses are generally set that way, or very, very close to it. So if you look at another jazz bass, it's the same setup. It's the same sort of little bit of relief in the neck. It's hard to see on the camera, I know. But it just gives me a bit of confidence, because it doesn't matter which bass I pick up, they all feel pretty much the same. So I'm not struggling with one and then picking up another one, have to play a lot softer to avoid fret buzz, that sort of thing. Any one that I pick up is pretty much the same. The other thing to consider when you're talking about fret buzzes and setups is the gauge of the strings. Now, not just the gauge, but also the string construction, because for a long time I used 40 to 100 DR high beams, and the high beams are a round core string. The 40 to 100 gives you a nice, really nice snap for slapping and popping, really easy to play. They're a round core and they're very, very flexible, so that means they vibrate a lot more. So when I use those, I have to go a little bit higher in the action, probably a 64th of an inch difference at the bridge end, If I am using something like chrome flat wounds, say 45 to 100 or 105, they've got a hex core, they're stiffer. I can set the action probably a 64th lower from my normal, but they are stiffer strings. So depending on what you like, you adapt the setup to get the right feel, to get the right tone, to reduce the fret rattle, and to make it playable for yourself. But it is worth keeping in mind that if there is too much relief in the neck, lowering the bridge saddles is going to cause more problems than it solves. That's why we always start with the order of things. Setting the relief of the neck, setting the height of the bridge saddles, then setting the intonation. That's assuming that the nut is cut properly and it's not too high. Now, the reason we put the capo on the first fret is to take that out of the equation, so you can still set it up, and if you're not confident enough to cut the nut yourself, you can get a guitar tech to do that for you. But once that's done, that's not going to change, but at least you can do the rest. So if you're changing strings, you're going from a round core to a hex core, and your bass needs a slight adjustment, you can do that. So I hope that information helps. As always, thanks so much for spending this time with me. Keep making music, keep playing bass, be good to each other, and I'll see you guys at the next video. It's bye for now, and take care.